Hi, everyone. This is Rebecca Smith Aldridge from the Mid-Hudson Library System. We're happy you've joined us here today for the 2016 Advocacy Day Briefing. Joining me today is Jeremy Johansson, the Executive Director of the New York Library Association. Jeremy, you want to say hi?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here.
Well, we're excited to have you here because it really takes so many people to make library advocacy work the right way. So we want to give you all the tools and ammunition you need to make an effective case to the decision makers in Albany this year. So what we're going to do is give you an overview of where we stand with the budget, how things are looking in Albany, an overview of our legislative priorities, and some of the best tips we could come up with to help you get through Advocacy Day if you're coming to Albany with us, and how you can best help from your library or home if you're not able to come to Albany with us on March 2nd. So we want to get started here by me actually getting my screen in order. Wouldn't that be great? So as we've talked about many times here in the Mid-Hudson Library System, the system is so strong because we work together to make good things happen. And the same thing works with advocacy. Our voice is much stronger when we speak together with one voice and we're all going in the same direction and using stories, local stories, to illustrate the bigger points that are being made by the New York Library Association. We're so lucky to have NYLA because they're the ones organizing things in Albany for us. They're the ones making sure there's an infrastructure in place when we arrive in Albany. We've got the support we need to get the message to the people who really need to hear from us. So we really want to spend today making sure you understand the why behind all of the what's, all the talking points we've got up on the New York Library Association's website, and we've been promoting through the Mid-Hudson Library System, so you can speak with confidence when you're talking to a legislator or to another library stakeholder who should be motivated to speak up, and that you could help empower to get out there and talk to their legislators or to other people in the government that can make a difference for libraries. So when we think about why this is such an important time, Jeremy's going to talk about the timing of advocacy messaging and how important it is to say the right thing at the right time to the right person. We just really wanted to start by reminding everyone how critical libraries are right now. This is one of the most important times in history for public libraries. And when we think about all we're doing and how much we've evolved beyond our reputation of being just books, there's so much work to be done to explain to people the value that we're bringing to our communities. So when we think about being, the number one point of free internet access, in some cases the only internet access, free internet access in a community, that's a major stumbling block for someone if they don't have access to the internet. And we're the ones making that connection for them. We're the ones creating the opportunity to get to information in all its varied formats. So when we think about how we actually have to convey to people that we're not just books, it's about access, it's about democracy, it's about education. These are the messages that we have to be so good at talking about.
You want me to put on earphones?
Hi, here. All right, okay, so it's not only our specific advocacy messages for the year, it's also talking about libraries in a way that resonates with people and really exemplifies what libraries are today. This is really critical when we're talking about libraries. We can't assume anyone knows what's going on in libraries today. They don't, and that's an unfortunate thing. We are much more knowledgeable about that than anybody else, so we've got to boil down our messages to the basics, make sure they understand the value we're bringing to the community beyond books and economic development that we've got going on. We're actually informing workforces that are drawing new businesses into our communities. We've got all sorts of digital literacy stuff going on. We've got early literacy stuff going on, which of course people expect, but it looks so much different than it used to look. So painting that picture for people in Albany who aren't paying attention to what's going on in libraries is as important as getting the word out about what the specific needs in the state budget are for libraries. They have to broaden their understanding that a maximum number of their constituents are benefiting from library services, and it might not look like what they think it looks like. So we're going to talk today a little bit about not just the verbal messages to deliver, but the visual messages we have to deliver as well. Jeremy has led the way in making sure we have fresh data about how New Yorkers are using libraries. And we've got great data that shows there's been a 10% increase in usage of libraries across the state in the past few years. So library use is growing throughout the state. And we're talking about not just using the metric of circulation, talking about how people are benefiting from programs and access to technology and all sorts of cool stuff that's going on at the library that, again, are non-traditional ways people think about counting how people use libraries. So gather your own statistics about your library and the stories from your library, because that's what creates a much richer texture to the stories you're going to tell when you come to Albany. It's not just about the talking points we're going to give you today. It's about making sure you've got local stuff to bring to your local state legislators. So Jeremy, could you give us a better sense of the timing of things that we're dealing with here?
Absolutely, absolutely. So this calendar year is like all others in that the legislature works on a very prescripted timeline. In New York State, we have a part-time legislature that comes into session in January, and they tend to wrap up for the year by the end of June. And the system kicks off each January with the State of the State. As Governor Cuomo is fond of making things a little bit different, he has combined the traditional State of the State address this year with his budget address. Until last year, those two activities were separate. So for the second year in a row, this year took place on January 13th. The governor put forward both the State of the State address and his outline for the executive budget. And the budgetary process in New York runs through a number of steps, starting with the executive budget. Then the legislature has their crack at it, and they each put forward their own proposals, one from the Senate and one from the Assembly. And that's where you get the three men in a room that I'm sure you've all heard about at one point or another in the media. And they work that out. And the goal that they're shooting for is to have everything agreed to and to align those three budget proposals by April 1st. We in New York State went through over 20 years of late budgets, and we can thank former Governor Patterson for inventing a new trick in which he was able to force the legislature to act more quickly with the threat of putting his executive budget into the first budget extender bill, which would force the legislature to accept the governor's proposal. So now that the governor has that hammer, it's forced the legislature to be far more efficient in getting the job done. If I had to put money on it this year, I would say that we've got a 75% chance of an on-time budget. There's always a specter that they might play politics and force things later, but I'm putting it that it'll be on time. And looking specifically at the budget timeline, the process works much like everything in life in that things get put off and put off as much as they possibly can. And so if you wonder why we have Advocacy Day when we do, the legislature starts in January, and the governor's budget comes out. They spend some time with some early process. There's budget hearings. If you check out on NYLA.org, you'll find that our Director of Government Relations, Michael Neppel, testified at the education hearing. So we're part of the process. But as far as the system really goes, every year they take off President's Week. This week, everything was shut down and dark. There were no session days. It's when the legislature returns after their President's Week vacation that they get serious, and it's the end of February and the beginning of March when they really get down to brass tacks with formulating the budget, and that's why we want to be in there as soon as they're coming back from that break early on in the final decision-making process. And so that's why we're coming to Albany then, and looking to influence the process as much as we can. So to talk a little bit about what we're looking at specifically for this year, on January 13th when the governor's numbers came out, we were both happy and sad. We were happy that the governor included in his executive budget the $5 million increase in library aid that was added by the legislature during last year's budget, which is not a given. The governor is often seen to roll back legislative ads in the budget, but the library one stuck, which is good news for us because that means that $5 million that we all worked so hard to secure last year is there, and we don't need to rework to get that money. But he didn't add anything at all to that number. So that number is at $91.6 million, and it's flat. And as I'm sure I can state unequivocally, none of your library budgets saw no increases in expenses over the last year. So having a flat budget really is not what we need to see. It doesn't provide for any increase in any of the expenses that you all incur. And so with the governor's putting that forward as his number, it's imperative that we all work with the legislature, and particularly the Senate, to make sure that our number moves forward. We have seen over the years that the place where that ad comes, the $5 million that we saw last year, is primarily pushed forward by the members of the New York State Senate. We saw a small ad last year from the Assembly, and we hope to see that again. But it's that's why our advocacy efforts are so important, is that we need to make sure that the members of the legislature, as they prepare their one-house budget proposals, are counteracting the governor's suggestion that libraries receive zero increase in funding. So what do our arguments for increased funding look like?
So one of the best arguments that we have that's been extremely effective is talking about the high level of return on investment that local communities see when the state invests state dollars in the library infrastructure in New York State. So the Division of Library Development, which is underneath the New York State Education Department, has estimated that for every $1 in state aid that we see come through, that's resulting in $7 worth of service at the local level. So at the front desk, on the front lines of public library services in New York State, we're seeing a 7-to-1 return on investment, which is huge. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is when you take a look at how state money flows, how it flows from the state into your actual library, there's actually a bunch of ways it flows into your library, but I want to focus on two major ways. One is your local library services aid, your LLSA, which is 31 cents per capita or $1,500, whichever is more. You might think when you're looking at the scheme of your budget, $1,500 is not that big of a deal, or that 31 cents per capita isn't a huge impact on your budget. The much bigger impact on your budget is the investment of state dollars in the system infrastructure. So for example, here in the Mid-Hudson Library System, those state monies underwrite so many of the system services your library relies on to provide 21st century library services. If your library had to pay for those out of pocket, you'd be in a pretty deep hole pretty quickly when we think about how much it would cost to have your own ILS, how much it would cost to have your own Overdrive account, all of the databases, the new e-magazines we've got here at Mid-Hudson, all of those costs, by sharing them amongst the libraries and facilitating those types of things like delivery here at Mid-Hudson, allows you to go to your taxpayers and ask for an amount that's affordable to the local taxpayer. But without that state subsidy of the system infrastructure, being a small local library by yourself would be next to impossible in a way that reflects the needs that people have to access library services in a way that actually speaks to, I don't know, technology. So when we think about the impact of state funding, it's not just that check you get through the state for that local library services aid as a public library. We're also talking about the impact on system services to help lift your library up so you have a higher platform from which to perform and respond to your community. So the message that we are incredibly effective with the money that comes through the state to libraries. We stretch those dollars more than almost any other organization that receives state dollars. But really what we want to talk about are those efficiencies that we achieve through state dollars. That's a very hot topic in Albany right now and has been since the governor took over. And actually it was a big topic when he was Attorney General. So the idea of efficiencies achieved through state money to libraries is an excellent talking point. So making sure you have a story in your back pocket about how system services benefit your constituents and therefore your legislators' constituents will have a big impact on the legislators that you're talking to. So again, really stress that we're smart with the funds that are allocated to us, that we're a model of government efficiency, and we provide high impact services with a rather low level of funding. Imagine what we could do if the state would fund us at legislated levels. That would be pretty exciting.
And yeah, when we say small dollars, it's very small dollars. Library aid is less than 1/10 of 1% of the New York State budget. The budget last year, ballpark, was $140 billion, and we're talking about less than $100 million. And even if you were to take things up to full funding under the laws Rebecca alluded to, that still keeps us below that 1/10 of 1%. And it's also worth mentioning and worth keeping in mind that of that huge $140 billion budget, less than 3% is actually up for debate. Most of the New York State budget are things that are required. It's much like your household expenses when first you take out the mortgage and the taxes and everything, the food bill, things that you have to pay, and then the discretionary funds that are left over. That's what we're all fighting about. And it's a tiny amount, a tiny proportion of the budget. And keep in mind that everyone that comes to Albany, as you see when you come up, there's always other groups that are there. Every group that is coming up and visiting their elected officials is making arguments that are, well, for their sakes, hopefully as compelling as ours. There's a very, very small pot to go around, and everyone is fighting for the same dollars. And quite frankly, and literally, the funding that comes, if we receive an increase, it's because someone else is not. It's very easy to start thinking about these numbers as abstracts, and that these numbers don't actually tie to anything, but they very much do. The funding that the state has to allocate out in their budget is tied to the revenue that comes in, and that number is fixed, and whatever increases we receive is because someone else did not get that money. When we say that we are fighting for increases in library aid, we quite literally are.
And here's a great illustration of, I think, why we're fighting, because we are pretty far behind where we should be.
Yeah, this chart is continued to have been updated over the years, and it's so effective in telling the story in a very simple graphic. So what we're looking at shows library aid in the New York State budget going all the way back to 1998. And it shows in these three lines three different numbers. The red line that looks like a mountain range up and down is the actual funding levels that library aid was allocated over the years. You see we had a couple of good years there in 2007 and 2007-8, and then I'm sure many of you or all of you remember the recession hitting, and we dipped all the way down to $79 million in 2011-12, and we've been climbing back since. It's been difficult, and those years I'm sure you all remember were hard to deal with. The blue line shows what the funding formula is, and the funding formula is set up in New York State law and establishes, based on the most recent census, so currently we're working off of the 2010 census, what funding should be according to the formulas that were originally contemplated by the legislature, and that number is $102.6 million. So you can see we've still got a ways to go before we would just be equal to what is under education law. And the green line is aspirational, I think, and just illustrates the point that if you were to apply standard rates of inflation upon the $88.5 million back from 1998, so in 1998 dollars, to just have the same buying power that was available to libraries at $88.5 million in 1998, we would have to be at $128+ million. So we can't even purchase the same volume and the same amount of goods and services that we could in 1998 because we're so far behind even the rate of inflation. So it really boils it down pretty clearly and shows that there's a lot of work to be done and that we're not even coming close to meeting the intentions of the folks that put the funding in place all those years ago.
So most of us can't really comprehend what $90 million or $100 million is actually doing. It sounds like such an enormous amount of money. But we wanted to give you a little snapshot of how state aid for libraries actually is deployed. It's not just coming to public libraries. It's not just coming to public library systems. It's spread throughout a multitude of state aid categories for libraries, which really starts to divide up that really tiny piece of pie even tinier when we think about how that impacts us at the local level.
This list isn't even a comprehensive list of all the programs that are included within the state aid formula. The full list is somewhere between 24 and 26 programs. Internally, we refer to this as the grinder, or Mike likes to call it the plinko. It's the funding goes into the top, and it's parsed out. And it's a mixed blessing. It certainly does make it seem like there's a lot of pieces and a lot of hands in the pot, so that when you see that $1,500 coming to your library locally, it doesn't seem like much money, but it allows the $91.6 million that is allocated in the state aid to ensure that all New Yorkers have access to information.
Great. So we wanted to, give you that kind of opening salvo of where we are today and just kind of get us ramped up for March 2nd and leading up to March 2nd, because making the case for this and all of the noise that's going on in Albany, we have to be really on our game to get the attention of the people who can make a difference as we move forward in this budget process. So we really want to empower library stakeholders and advocates to speak up and to remind you that you are allowed to speak up. Library staff people can speak up to legislators. Trustees can speak up to legislators. Friends, of course, are speaking up to legislators. We all have a role in the advocacy for an increase in state aid for libraries. So when we think about who's going to get this done, it starts with us. If we're not well-informed and well-spoken about the issues and articulating the needs of our communities and how libraries are helping our communities be more sustainable, nobody else is going to do it for us. So we know you guys get that because you're here listening to us this morning. We just want to remind you to help others in your organization to be empowered about speaking up, because again, if we don't do it, nobody else is going to do it for us. So to make our job easier as advocates, there is a committee at the New York Library Association called the Legislative Committee that works year-round to keep their eye on what's going on in Albany, to figure out the best angles to be using when talking to the governor, the governor's staff, the Division of Budget, and 2 local legislators by each library. And they've come up with a simple yet absolutely brilliant way for us to move forward in a way that's the first time we've been getting traction in increasing library aid in a way that would be sustainable for the future was because of the messaging we were starting to use last year, which we're going to continue to use this year, which is that libraries are education.
We found that this message resonates for a number of reasons, and we can make solid arguments behind it. That libraries are chartered by the same New York State Board of Regents that oversee colleges and BOCES and other educational institutions, and that the library aid that is allocated in the state budget is administered through the New York State Department of Education. When schools close at the end of each day, week, or school year, the libraries remain open to educate both New York's children as well as to serve as an educational vehicle for all New Yorkers. And we are looking to position libraries as in the minds of both of all the members of the legislature as being tied directly to education. Education in the state budget is something of a sacred cow. Education aid receives an increase almost every year without fail. In historical terms, even in those down terms where libraries were receiving strong cuts back in 8 and 9, library education aid at worst stayed flat. So we are looking to make sure that we drive home the message that libraries are delivering on education services and should be treated in the state budget on par with education aid, so that we receive the same funding proportionately that they do.
So it's one thing for us to say libraries are education, but we needed to know if that message would actually resonate with people. You can't go in with blinders on and assume that what you think is what everyone would agree with. So NYLA commissioned a poll through Siena, a well-respected third-party poll, so it would not be biased by NYLA, asking people in New York, do you think libraries are education? And resoundingly, 94% of respondents said public libraries are important to our state's educational infrastructure. So we've got a very solid foundation from which to continue to make the case. Libraries are education, and getting people thinking about us in a much broader way so that we can start being aligned with how they're making budgetary decisions about the education infrastructure of New York and making sure we're on the table when those discussions are happening. We're pretty small in the scheme of things when it comes to the education aid that goes out through the state budget. So making our voices heard in that context, definitely we have to speak up and step up to make that happen. So our work this legislative season is to connect our legislators with their constituents' opinion on this matter. So it's not us saying libraries are education, it's our constituents, those we serve, and New Yorkers throughout the state are saying libraries are education. And driving that home and being the person that's carrying that message from the legislator's constituents to that legislator is one of the roles we're playing here in the next few weeks to make sure they understand the impact of their decision about library aid in the upcoming budget. So to get down to brass tacks, we have a very firm message that libraries are education, and we have to make the ask, right? You have to close the deal when you're talking to a legislator and tell them what we want, what their constituents need from them in Albany to make sure happens in the state budget is to fully fund New York's libraries. We're essential to success. We should be fully funded as per the legislation says we are, to $102 million. Absent that, we want to see increases that are on par with education aid. So that's a two-pronged ask, right? We're telling them really what we should be happening is full funding. But if you can't get us there, what needs to happen is matching increases to library aid with education aid because libraries are education. The other pretty exciting thing that's going on today, and we've been talking about this so much at Mid-Hudson, is that it's actually a historic year of library advocacy because we've got a coordinated ask to go along with our budgetary ask related to the construction aid that comes through those aid categories we showed you before. Many of your libraries have benefited from the State Aid for Public Library Construction program, and that money has been flat for the past 10 years at $14 million. Each year that money has to be appropriated and approved, and it's something that we are pretty confident is going to happen because legislators really see the impact of that money in the local communities that they represent. But the fact is, in the Mid-Hudson Library System alone, we have over $50 million of need in our 5 counties alone. Statewide, you could just imagine $14 million isn't going very far. Jeremy, do you want to speak a little bit to the statewide need of construction in New York for public libraries?
Absolutely. The New York State Division of Library Development, in their last survey of need, put the estimate of the statewide deferred need for capital improvements in libraries at $2.2 billion. So we're just on an order of magnitude that this funding is just not able to keep up. And I see that on the slide that we have up, we have some pictures that were submitted to the Library Horror Stories campaign that we ran last month. So thank you to Claverack and Woodstock, as well as lots of other libraries that submitted pictures. What we were finding is that it's very hard for the library community to talk about the problems. We're all so good about talking about all the wonderful things that we do and the things that we accomplish in serving our communities that we struggle to shine the light on things that we're struggling with. And we put the call out and really leaned on everyone to say, well, we need to show what the problems look like. And we've received a number of fantastic photographs, fantastic in that they really illustrate these points, that there's a need for the state to make a significant improvement in the way that they invest in our library infrastructure. We are following on the successful campaign that was run in New York City in collaboration between New York Public, Queens Borough Library, and the Brooklyn Public Library that collaborated on an Invest in Libraries campaign, which resulted in the New York State City Council making a 10-year, $300 million commitment to the libraries in that area. So we're building on their success, or hoping to, and are asking this year that the legislature put forward $30 million to fund the library construction aid program, and that would be on par with what New York City put forward for their libraries, and that would allow us to begin to modernize our state's libraries. The word infrastructure is very hot this year in Albany. The governor, in his executive budget, put forward some pretty sizable program proposals for infrastructure around roads and bridges, and our argument is that libraries are just as much an important piece of the community infrastructure as a bridge. And the numbers that we've seen out of the Division of Library Development, these are some of them somewhat shocking, that nearly half of the public libraries in New York State are over 60 years old. And a quarter of the public libraries do not have accessibility to all of their public spaces. So there's a tremendous need that we need to address, and we think that it's the time is right to do this, and hope that the legislature will agree with us and show us a pretty significant increase over the stagnant $14 million number.
We wanted to share a couple of very local numbers. You each know what your own situation is in your library facility, but just to give you a feel here in our region in the Mid-Hudson Valley, in Mid-Hudson Library system, 54% of our libraries are not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So just the very basic fundamental needs that our community have to just get in our building and access our services, over half of our libraries are not making that happen, which is really not acceptable. So making sure we're making the case that libraries should be for everybody, not just the physically able to get into the facility, is pretty important. When we take a look at the number Jeremy just gave us of about half of the libraries in New York State are 60 years old. In Mid-Hudson, which is an area where libraries got a very early start in New York's history, 56% of our libraries are more than 50 years old, and 38% of our libraries here in Mid-Hudson are over 100 years old. So when you try to think about delivering modern library services in a building that's over 100 years old, very quickly you run into issues that need to be addressed. Not only about wiring, but specifically about spaces. That picture of a Claverack there on the left of the screen so tells the story. Libraries are about people, not about stuff, and we need spaces for people to come together and learn, to be a community and learn together. What you see there in Claverack is the circulation desk, and programming having to happen at the circulation desk because they can't accommodate the number of people that want to come in and learn together. So these are very basic fundamental needs we have. We're not building Taj Mahals here. We're trying to build those types of buildings that are what our communities need today. What we had yesterday has long been, I think, detrimental to what our communities are looking for as we move forward. And our ability to be vibrant community centers are really going to apply to how well we've designed and thought through our buildings. That also goes to the areas of energy efficiency, energy conservation, how much it costs to run our buildings. Are we really optimizing our buildings to keep costs to the taxpayers lower? So there's another good talking point about how state money can be used to leverage local dollars to make library services as affordable as possible to the local constituents. So there's tons of stories to be told about needs. If you've got stories like these, make sure you take pictures. Make sure you've got pictures of water stains and overcrowding and people queued up to use the computers at your library, whatever it might be. I so wish I had a picture of the Statsburg Library about 5 years ago when they had to get a porta-john and put it on the front yard of the library because all the summer reading programs had to be held on the front yard because they didn't have the space inside the library. These are the stories that are really powerfully told through pictures. So we thank Nyla for doing the horror stories because I think that was a great way to start elevating people's understanding of the environments that a lot of libraries are operating in. They are absolutely subpar in an alarming number of libraries. So doubling the amount of construction aid coming into the state for public library construction could make a world of difference for generations to come of library users and communities that benefit from library services. So this is a pretty exciting time to be advocating for library construction, and we know you guys can help us tell the story with the stories and the pictures that will really help make the case in this area. Cool. Jeremy, anything else you want to say about the budget or construction aid before we move on to the legislative priorities?
No, I think we've got it covered.
All right, cool. So something that we've learned over the years is that until the budget passes in April 1st, Jeremy said, right, we've got a 75% chance that they'll actually get the budget done on time. That's not the end of the story when it comes to library advocacy. We have the kind of second part of our season starts up after the budget finally gets passed. We know where we're going to land when it comes to state aid for libraries and construction aid. Then we move into advocating for the legislative priorities. And these are legislative priorities priorities that are of importance to the entire New York library community, not just public libraries. But what's really critical, and I encourage all of you to kind of understand and broaden your idea of being library advocates, is that libraries throughout New York, regardless of type, we're all in this together. So we've all got to speak up for each other. So we wanted to make sure you understood the top 3 legislative priorities of the New York Library Association this year, because while we're in our visits on March 2nd, they're going to come up. You want to make sure you're familiar with them and understand what they're about, and to at least be knowledgeable enough to know what the legislator might be asking about so that you could help follow up on the behalf of another type of library in our region. So the first one is related to school libraries. It was a very powerful bill that Jeremy's going to explain to us.
Absolutely. This bill, which we refer to as the Expand Access to School Libraries and Librarians, has been around for a very long time. In one form or another, this bill goes back over 30 years and has it's an ongoing discussion. But we have a new version, and I have at the bottom of the screen there you'll see the bill numbers. So it's sponsored in the Senate by Senator Farley as 3931, and in the Assembly by Assemblywoman Szilagyi as 6784. You want to reference those numbers when you talk to your legislators. They'll want to know. That's how they're going to find them. And that information will be included in the materials should you come up for Advocacy Day. The reason that this is important is that we know that a number of studies have shown that students that have access to a certified school librarian do better on standardized tests, on college admission rates, just across the board. And there, as the curriculum continues to expand, there are things that our students need to know, particularly around both digital and information literacy, that there is not room for in the general classroom curriculum, and making sure that we have young people that will be our citizens of tomorrow, that they are capable of evaluating information is absolutely critical. To support this bill, the New York Library Association is conducting, in partnership with the School Library System Association, a census. We're tracking down all the school librarians in New York State and finding out how many buildings are already in compliance with the staffing levels that are contemplated in this bill. My gut tells me that there are more schools that are already meeting this requirement than are not, but that's the first question we're being asked when we discuss this with the legislature as well. What is this really going to cost, and is this an unfunded mandate, that magic word or magic phrase that legislators use to dismiss something that they don't really want to work on? This will be around. I don't expect that we'll be able to pass this in a single year. As I mentioned earlier, this has been something that's been an issue for the library community for decades, and we'll continue to work on it. It's a bedrock issue, and speaks to the value of libraries, not just in our communities, but within our schools.
I think each of the bills that we're talking about here today just have so much to do with common sense. It's like so obvious. The research shows kids do better at school when there's a school librarian on staff. When there's an active library community within that school, student achievement is higher. And isn't that really the point of what we're trying to do in our education infrastructure? So this bill makes a lot of sense, and I think it needs the whole library community pulling together to make the case for it, because public libraries and school libraries are pretty close partners and doing really good work together. So our ability to be articulate on this issue, I think, is important for our whole community, not just for the school library community. And that might, I think lead us to our next bill that we're going to talk about here, which is related. It might seem more like on the academic side of things. And I know you're wondering what the heck that is. We're going to tell you. But this bill really speaks to the need for common sense to be applied in how state money is used. This taxpayer access to publicly funded research speaks to the need. Well, let me just set the stage for you here. There's state money being invested in research that's done in New York State universities and higher educational institutions that then is not actually accessible to New Yorkers without going through a paywall or for a library paying to have access to that research that was state funded. I'll let Jeremy explain this a little more.
Sure. So what this bill is putting forward as a new operating model would put New York State in alignment with the National Institute of Health, which is one of the largest public funders of research in the country. And what that requirement would be is that once the state funds research that is done, that any research that's published in a peer-reviewed journal, once that has been published, that research would then be required to be made available in a free online repository, available to anyone who wanted to access that information. The caveat there would be that there's a moratorium that would be in place. So the journal is published, the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation gives funding, and a research project is done. It is then published in the journal Nature. A year after that publication date, it would be required to be made available online for free. And that moratorium period was just expanded during the last session. Previously, it was a 6-month moratorium, and there was pushback we found from some of the online database providers that they felt that that did not give them adequate time to capitalize on their business model. So we affectionately refer to this bill as TAPER, which is what that cuddly little creature on the right is. It's a taper, and why not work that into one of the slides? So very simple, common sense bill, but and a good tie-in with the academic community, where it's certainly of interest. But it would also expand access to scholarly research to patrons of public libraries as well.
Cool. So the next bill I'm actually incredibly excited about. It's something that we struggle with here a lot in the Mid-Hudson Library System. And Jeremy's really, I think, taken a leadership role in making something that might be possible that could change the face of how library construction projects are funded for years to come. So I'll let Jeremy explain this one.
Sure. So I imagine many of you have heard of DASNY, the Dormitory Authority of New York State. And what DASNY does, it serves as very similarly to a large bank and provides bonding and finance for large construction projects. Their baseline threshold is between $2 and $3 million, and I know that maybe quite a few of you on the line think, well, I'm never going to do a $3 million construction project at my library, so I can stop listening. Well, here's what's new about this. The bill that we've put forward and is sponsored by Senator Farley and Assemblyman Abenante, it would allow small projects that are below the DASNY bonding threshold to be aggregated through the New York Library Association, bundled, and then submitted as one package so that we could access bonding through DASNY. The historic model for this was, even if you did have a large project and wanted to go through DASNY, there was an arcane process through which you would need to work with your local legislator and pass a bill through both houses and get signed by the governor, giving specific permission to your library as a single institution to be eligible for to work with DASNY. So we're looking to circumvent that process and to modernize that process so that no library again would have to go through the hoops of getting added as a one-off into the DASNY's bonding authority. As well as opening the doors for small projects that would then be able to access this funding mechanism.
So for those of you that are facing building projects, I know this is something that is going to be of interest to you. So learn more about it. There's a link in the chat box that goes to the New York Library Association's website where you can download the legislative priorities, which gives you a description of this bill. We're, I guess, calling it this is a really sexy name, Jeremy, thanks so much, the Permit Collaborative Capital Improvements for Small and Rural Libraries. So obviously we're going to have to unpack that a bit and make sure you can explain it pretty concisely, particularly if it could really make a difference to your library and your plans for the future to respond to community needs. I think that would, be a very good thing for you to be well spoken about. And Jeremy, I'm going to go off script for a minute and just point out to everyone who may or may not be familiar with the kind of code at the bottom of this slide, where you see what we call the bill number S.6651. That's the Senate version of the bill that's sponsored by Senator Farley, who is the ultimate library champion in Albany for many, many years. And that's accompanied by a bill that's A for Assembly 9240, which is then sponsored by this Assembly person, Mr. Abenanti, who's the chair of the Libraries and Education Technology Committee. So both of those legislators are extremely influential within their parties and within their houses to make the case for libraries. So another thing we wanted to encourage you to do is to research your own legislators before you get to Albany. Make sure you know what committees they're on, if they happen to be in a position of power from a majority standpoint or a committee standpoint. Are they influential on a particular topic? Asking them to sign on to these bills is what the ask is when we get to the legislative portion of the advocacy season. So we're elevating their awareness that these bills exist. We're asking them to write letters of support or to sign on to these bills to give them more weight when the legislators that are taking the lead to introduce them are going into session or going into caucus to bring these to the fore and get them to move forward in the process that is Albany. It's not like it just goes up for a vote and that's it. There's a whole process they're going through of committee vetting and budgetary concerns that are being looked at by other portions of government. So the more legislators that sign on to these bills, the more important they are when they are being considered. So that's the work of the legislative advocacy portion of the calendar that we're talking about here this morning. So when we really talk about putting our knowledge into action, you've got at least 3, if not more, opportunities to be putting forth your opinion to your legislators about how you feel about state aid for public libraries, state aid for public library construction, and the 3 bills that we've covered here today. The most effective is always face-to-face, actually going to visit your legislator in their local office or in their Albany office. If you want to come with us on March 2nd, that'd be fantastic. We love packing the rooms and making a big impression that there's a ton of library supporters in their district. That really makes an impact to them. But it's got to happen one way or another. If you can't find the time to get up to Albany or into a legislator's local office, pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call that local office, call the Albany office, ask to speak to the legislator. I always get a call or two every year where a library director or trustee is shocked that they actually got the legislator on the phone. It does happen. But you might also be speaking to a legislative aide in their office who's just as influential as the legislator, believe it or not. So don't be dismayed if your meeting ends up being with a legislative aide or your phone calls ends up being with a legislative aide. They often are the people that take a deep dive into an issue and then are the advisor to a legislator on the position the legislator should take. So the more people in the legislator's office that understand our issues, the better off we're going to be. Each legislator only has so much bandwidth and so much work they can do in a day. So those support staff are there to help them inform their actions and their opinions about the issues that are facing their constituents. So again, take those opportunities when you get them. Invite those legislators and the aides and the staff into your libraries to see what you're dealing with. And don't miss the really simple opportunity that NYLA hands you on a silver platter to communicate online with our legislators. The NYLA Online Advocacy Center is really one of the easiest ways to quickly have an impact in Albany. There's a pre-drafted letter. You just click on it. You can edit it if you want to. You can throw in some local information if you want, or if you're in a real hurry, you can just hit send that sucker and get it up there, because those numbers matter. What we're hearing from legislators is that they're basically counting how many constituents contact me on a particular topic, and that's how they make the decision of where to spend their time and attention, because they're representing their constituents. So if they don't know their constituents care about a topic, they're not going to give the bandwidth to that topic. So adding up the numbers is absolutely critical right now. This is the time to influence the decision makers in Albany. So doing 1, 2, or God bless you, all 3 of these things is really what needs to happen now. And not just by yourself. You guys need to get out there and inspire the other stakeholders in your organization to do this stuff too, to bump up our numbers. Jeremy just sent us the report for the Online Advocacy Center to see how many points of contact each legislators have received so far. So I already know there's work to be done in each of our legislative districts throughout the state, but here in Mid-Hudson as well.
Yeah, that report showed that we are coming up on 3,500 advocates that have taken action just through the online portal, not counting other means of outreach. And while that number sounds pretty good, I mean, you think about 3,500 people standing in a field, it looks pretty good. When you start to benchmark that against some other numbers, we estimate that there's about 25,000 people that are employed by libraries in New York State, so people that this impacts their job. And so all of a sudden, wow, 3,500 doesn't sound so great. And then if you push that out a little further and think about the over 10 million card holders and library users in New York State, now the fact that we only have 3,500 people that we could get to take a minute and a half to put their name down on the list and say, I support library funding, seems really small. So we do need to continue to push and get that information out and encourage everyone to sign on that they support this effort.
So when you're reaching out and inspiring other people to reach out, we want to make the messaging around the issues we've talked about today as simple as possible. We highly encourage you to study up before you make the call or have a visit. You've got fantastic talking points that Kirsten's been posting in the chat box the whole hour we've been talking. So you can have the talking points that we've shared with you today about the budget, about construction aid, and about all three of the legislative priorities that we've gone over today. Just a reminder, get to your legislators' website, check out what their top issues are, things they personally are advocates for, committees that they serve on, what's up in their life, check out their Facebook page, follow them on Twitter, really get to know your legislators so you can build a relationship with them. Over time, the more often they see you, the more knowledge they're building about your issues that you're concerned about, and that really that you're helping them connect with a broader spectrum of their constituents they could otherwise. On average, in the communities that libraries serve, 50% of residents have library cards. Those library card holders are the legislators' constituents. They want to know what challenges their constituents are facing, and you can help be the ambassador to explain that to legislators. So own that role to be a community leader and make the connection on behalf of constituents to their legislators. Just a reminder to gather key statistics, stories, anecdotes about your library, the stories about your patrons, the people you serve, your community, the impact your library has. NYLA can do all the talking at once, Mid-Hudson can do all the talking at once, but without those personal, individual stories, that's what sticks in legislators' minds. That's why we've launched the campaign this year to really connect the real people behind the library cards that are benefiting from the services to explain the massive impact that library services have on individuals, on families, and on communities. So do your homework, gather your local stuff, and be ready for the opportunity that when it presents itself or when you make it happen, if it hasn't presented itself yet. So we just want to put a plug in. March 2nd is coming up pretty fast. March 2nd is Library Advocacy Day in Albany, which is organized by NYLA and the Legislative Committee. It's an opportunity to come together with hundreds, if not thousands, of library advocates in Albany, marching the halls of the Capitol and the Legislative Office Building with appointments with their legislators and legislative staff to really drive home the points that we were covering here this morning. This is the time to get in front of the people with other people like you from across the system and across the state to make our case for library funding in this year's budget. So we've got buses going up to Albany if you want to take the bus. The deadline is next Thursday, the 25th. We've got plenty of room left and really exciting news because so many of the friends groups in our region invested to underwrite the bus. We've actually got a 25% reduction in the ticket for the bus this year. So it's just $9 to get on the bus and come on up. Our bus captain this year is Kirsten Kruger, and you know how much fun she is. So I think $9 is, I think, even a bargain just to hang out with Kirsten, honestly. So get on the bus, drive yourself. All the information you need to get to Albany is available on the Mid-Hudson website and on the NYLA website. We're making appointments with each of the legislators. You don't have to do that on your own. We make those appointments for you. We come with you. We start the conversation and then open the floor for you to tell that local story that will make the impact on your legislator. I think we're even doing a rally this year. Is that right?
That's right. We will be in the well of the Legislative Office Building, which I'm sure all of you have either been in or seen on the news. There's so often press conferences there, the waterfall behind us, and we'll have a number of members of the legislature that are going to come down and address the assembled advocates, and it's our opportunity to fill the building and show that the library community is passionate and is willing to make a lot of noise in support of library funding.
So if you're coming to Advocacy Day and you haven't been before, we just have a couple of tips for you. With the most practical, to wear comfortable shoes. We do a lot of walking on Advocacy Day. You do have to go through a security checkpoint, so you want to make sure you give yourself a little extra time to get to your appointments. And it's pretty similar to going through airport security, so you'll have to put your bag through the x-ray machine, make sure there's no metal in your pockets, all that good stuff. And sometimes there's a bit of a backup. The library community is pretty big, and that line can add up. So at the beginning of the day and at lunchtime, give yourself extra time to get through that. From Mid-Hudson, specifically, we're going to have myself, Kirsten, our Executive Director, Tom Sloan, and our Assistant Director, Mary Beth Advocate, on site in Albany. Just look for them and they'll help you. If you're not sure what to do next, just find one of us and we'll help you get through the day. Each person who comes to Advocacy Day is welcome and encouraged to speak up while we're in the room. So don't just leave it or think, oh, am I allowed to talk here? It's your floor. Let the system rep know you want to talk. We'll make sure you get a chance to do so. Or if there's a natural pause, go ahead and jump in and say what you need to say. This is our opportunity while we're there. And definitely make an opportunity to get the photograph with your legislator if you're lucky enough to run into them that day. Use that photograph on social media through your library's page, use it in your library's newsletter, send that photo to your legislator so they can use it in their venues. They love photo ops, and this is a nice way to get libraries and their photos stream wherever they might be. Other big tip that we have for you is to invite your legislators to your libraries. Many libraries have made that connection with their legislators at Advocacy Day that's resulted in a visit that then you'll see in the future, it will pay off. They'll get a better sense of what you're dealing with. They'll understand more when you call and talk about your facility needs because they'll know they've been there. They understand what's going on. It's really important that they see people using your library so they really get a sense of what it's like for their constituents to interact with your library services. And now we've got Basecamp. Jeremy, would you explain what Basecamp is?
Sure. So once you arrive in the Legislative Office Building, you'll come in through the doors. As soon as you enter the building, there'll be a NILA presence there for a place for you to sign in, although a lot of folks on this call will have signed in on the bus. But you'll see us welcoming you there. And NILA Basecamp is in through the Legislative Office Building and through the well, and we'll have signs to get you there. It's in room 120. It's a little tiny coat closet, really, but it's a base of operations and where we will have information, if you've made it to Albany on your own, about what meetings are scheduled that you might want to join in on, as well as packets of information that you can use to deliver to your meetings, whoever you're meeting with, and to kickstart the conversations. It's also a place where you can ditch your coat.
And get coffee. If you can't make it to Albany on Advocacy Day, we actually encourage you to plan to make a call to your legislators' Albany office on March 2nd. We love it when the phone is ringing off the hook when we're waiting for our appointment and it's library people calling to let them know they support the people who are in Albany on March 2nd. So if you can't make it or you're going to come but you know your whole friends group can't make it, ask them all to make a call on that day, close to the appointment time or somewhere we're in the span between 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That amps up the excitement of having the libraries come to visit legislators in those offices. So again, if you're going to make a call, maybe you time it for March 2nd or the day before or the day after, just to add to the weight of the library issue during that week. Just a reminder, the Online Advocacy Center, this is what it looks like when you get there through the link that Kirsten posted in the chat box area. It really is very, very simple. Honestly, you just a couple of clicks and you're done. It knows who your legislators are. It gets the messages right to them. And then it gives you a chance to share on social media that you did that so you could inspire other people to do the same thing. Social media is extremely powerful, particularly Twitter and Facebook. If your library has a Twitter and Facebook account, leverage that to get more more of your library stakeholders and patrons connected with the online advocacy center. And on Advocacy Day, we're going to be using the hashtag, what you see right there, NYLAAD16. So tagging that can help you see the wealth of activities that are going on that day for people across New York who are coming into Albany and participating at NYLA Advocacy Day. It's a big event. I think people are excited to be making an impact, and you can be a part of that whether you're in Albany or afar. So again, if you can't make it to Albany, use that hashtag, post, encourage people, raise awareness about what's going on in Albany that day. We've got a campaign going on here at Mid-Hudson right now where we're inspiring our patrons to inspire their neighbors to actually use the online advocacy center, which has been working fantastic. We've got people using the library use value calculator, which we'll make sure you've got a link to calculate how much they save by using their library, and then snapping a picture of that dollar amount to educate their neighbors. This is how much I save annually at the library. Of course, we want the state to invest in this to keep it going because it means real dollars to real people in our community. So this is Alina from the Phoenicia Library. She's a big library user. Her family's saving $9,000 a year by using the library. On the right-hand side, you see the library use value calculator. It's actually an iPad set up in the front desk area of the Butterfield Library in Cold Spring. People are calculating right when they check out how much money they've saved by using the library either that day or that week or that year, which is raising the awareness amongst our patrons of that there are real dollars associated with the services that they enjoy, benefit from, and rely on. So we have to remember we have to educate from the inside out. Our own patrons may not realize the financial impact of having a library and funding a library and where all that money comes from. I guarantee you they don't understand where the money comes from to make your library happen. So help educate them, and then they're more likely to be a stakeholder as well as an advocate who will speak up. For people who aren't sure what to say, NYLA just spoon feed you what you need. If you like using Twitter, you can just copy and paste some of the tweets that are here. All of these are available at nyla.org. So again, on March 2nd, this might be a cool time to be using Twitter. If you haven't used your Twitter account in a while, get back on. Here's a nice excuse to do it. And make sure you always use the hashtag NYLALAD16 to make sure it's trending for Advocacy Day on March 2nd. So I think we've made it pretty clear that now is the time. There is a sense of urgency right now. This is the time to influence the two budget bills. That means the budget bill from the Senate and Assembly. So if we're not speaking up now, we can complain later when we don't see libraries in there. Truthfully, we could complain later if they don't put libraries in there, but I want to make sure it's not because we didn't do our job right now. So again, now is the time. If you've already done the online advocacy center, make that phone call, plan a visit, invite your legislators into your library. I guarantee one of those things you haven't done yet. I'm pretty sure you haven't done at least one of those things. So there's probably something you can be doing, because really libraries matter so much. We are essential to the people that we serve. We've got to stand up on their behalf to make sure we have the resources to go forward. The tax cap environment makes the local funding issue harder and harder each year. So the state dollars are more critical than ever before. So just a reminder, everything you need to be a success as an advocate, for the most part, is available at nyla.org/advocacy. The talking points, the online advocacy center, the info you need for Advocacy Day. But just a reminder, if you're coming to Advocacy Day, register at midhudson.org so we can get you the appointment schedule and let you know about any issues related to transportation or things that have changed for the day. At nyla.org, you can also see your tips for meeting with your legislators, and a big reminder that after you get a chance to talk to your legislator, either in person or on the phone, to send them a thank you letter. One of the things libraries are known for in Albany is being polite and grateful, and people like us for that. So we like to keep that reputation going. Just to close out here, we really want to remind you that you particularly can make a difference. And you might think, oh, I'm just a library clerk, or I'm a library friend. Why would I be the one speaking up on behalf of the library? Each one of us can make a huge difference when talking to a legislator if we're well-spoken and passionate about our love for the library. When we're well-spoken about the impact libraries have and the pure joy that libraries bring to people's lives, and both I think a self-actualization standpoint and also just from basic need standpoint, access to technology or the internet or social connections. These are things that humans need to survive these days, and libraries are at the center of making that happen. So it's going to take all of us speaking up to do that. So we just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to learn more about the issues this year and empowering yourself to speak with confidence and comfort when you get to Albany or you're on the phone with your legislators. Jeremy, before we go, I just want to say thank you to you for taking the time to help us here in the Mid-Hudson Library System do as well as we can to advocate for this money. We really rely on NYLA to help us for this, and we so appreciate your time this morning.
Oh, absolutely. I want to extend my thanks to you and to everyone that's on the line and everyone that takes the time to watch this recording, because without you as the individual advocates, there's really nothing that we can accomplish here in Albany. For all the canned materials that we put out there, it's really the home-cooked meals of the local stories that make an impact. So I thank everyone for their efforts, and I'm looking forward to another successful year of library advocacy.
Great. It looks like most of the questions that have been asked in chat have been answered. For those of you who are looking for ways to pass on this information, this webinar is recorded, so you'll be able to share it with the other people that you work with at your library. It'll be posted on the website at midhudson.org, along with all the other links of the resources that we talked about here today. So I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending this morning and for all you do to get the word out about how important libraries are to the people who have influence over our budgets and the money flowing through the state to libraries. We can't do this without everyone doing it together. So thank you so much.